Good morning. Nice to see all of you. And let's just kick off by introducing the panel here. We'll start at the far end and come this way with Christa Emerson, who's from UnitedHealth. Christa, why don't you just say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be back on campus. I did my graduate work here at the University of Minnesota. I've been with UnitedHealth Group for almost 19 years, and during that time have been in generalist, specialist roles, talent, compensation, so have enjoyed seeing that broad spectrum within HR. Excited to share with you today.
Hi everyone, I'm Kari Ziemer, and I'm with the Schwan company. I'm gonna stop talking for a minute, okay? I'm really excited to be here today. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about, and when we talk about career development, we talk a lot about how it really connects to our culture. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But I've been with Schwan's for 13 years. Before that was at UnitedHealth Group, and then at RBC Capital Markets. So really excited to be here with you today and talk about this topic.
Hello everyone, my name is Gockowski. I'm from US Bank. I've actually been with the bank for just under 2 years, but I've spent the last 15 years in leadership and learning at retail companies. So I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about really change in the workplace. There's been so much that's been happening rapidly, and I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Hi everyone, I'm Kari Holden. It's a pleasure to see you all. A lot of you I've worked with over the last 10 or so years. I'm now with Coursera. I had been with CEB and Gartner for a long time, which is why I have so many familiar faces in the room. But I'm excited about this topic as well. I think we can all resonate with that. You know, how are we focused on upskilling our future of work? And really, how has workplace development changed over the years, especially with the new digital era and the introduction of AI? So it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I'm excited to be on this panel.
Thank you. So Chris Harrington from Philadelphia. Very good to be back here in Minneapolis. So thank you for having me. I'm with Randstad, not to be confused with Evan Ramstad. But I work within the part of Randstad that's really focused on how can we help employers hire, retain, and develop their employees. So this is a topic that's certainly close to our hearts.
Well, welcome to all of you. And let's just kick off by kind of doing a little level setting, which I want to ask that, you know, in this time when labor has really become scarce, particularly in Minnesota and some of handful, about a dozen or so other states, more so than the rest of the country. And on top of that, we're about to see the effect of the decline in births that happened in 2008 and 2009. Kids coming out of high school, fewer kids coming out of high school, entering the workforce and entering college. So I just want to ask, is your company doing more to retain people you have? And is your employee turnover a little bit going up or down? And we'll start with Christa because UnitedHealth is constantly hiring, right? Attracts a huge number of applicants. I've heard your CEO boast about it on quarterly earnings calls.
I think it was 4.6 million applications last year. So yes, lots of applications. But retention, I think, is one of those outcomes as HR professionals that will always be at the core of any of our talent and people strategies, and certainly as at UnitedHealth Group. In terms of our turnover, we saw turnover start raising in early 2021. We saw it peak about a year later, early 2022. But since July of 2022, it's actually been coming down month over month, and we're kind of settling in at this turnover rate that's lower than pre-pandemic. And certainly, I think some of that is just broader economic conditions have helped us. And with that turnover spike, we really focused on retaining our employees. And one of the pieces of feedback that we get from employees often is the reason they join UnitedHealth Group is because they see this opportunity for a huge growth career and ability to grow over time. We also hear when people leave that one of the reasons that they leave is because they're able to find more growth or broader responsibilities at another company. So with that, really leaning into internal hiring and internal mobility. And a few things that we've done to support our employees with broader mobility is we've taken the education requirements off of as many positions as possible. We also removed a requirement that we had for people to be in a role for a certain amount of time before they posted for the next role. We'd rather have them move internally than externally. In UnitedHealthcare, the business that I'm in, we specifically put a practice in place that required almost all positions to be exclusively internally posted first, and you had to exhaust all of that before we can go external. And then I would say the last thing is we have been hosting career learning sessions for our employees. They tell us that it's really hard to navigate the breadth and scale of UnitedHealth Group. And so we've been talking about resume tips and interviewing tips and helping to personalize by saying what might some of those next opportunities for you be based on your skills and experience. And in early 2023, our internal hiring rate was about 44%, and today it's 55%. So through those efforts, we've really seen an impact there, and we think through that additional movement, growth, development, it will help our retention ultimately as well.
Christa, were those changes just after the pandemic? In other words, you started to make those changes after seeing that churn rate rise?
We did. That was our response to some of that churn rate and to the employee feedback that we just continually get about navigating careers at United. We know we need to do better.
You just want to go down the road, Kari? Do you want to talk about Schwan's a little on the
I
churn
guess
rate there?
so. We've seen some benefits recently in terms of our turnover, and it's due in large part to some of the folks that are sitting up front here who are leading our generalist function, but really being very intentional about the specific issues that are affecting turnover and retention and addressing them uniquely. Because what you see in a manufacturing organization in terms of what's driving turnover there is going to be different than what you're going to see in a corporate environment. And that's going to be different than what you might see in a kind of field sales organization. So I think that custom approach is really important. And we have seen a pretty significant decline across the organization. But the one area I would just speak to briefly is we saw a very significant decline in our kind of key talent, director and above. So we've got about 300 people in that part of the organization. And it's been just based on intentionality. So really being very intentional about kind of individual development plans, having regular coaching sessions, and then giving them opportunities to connect with other levels of leadership across the organization so they can imagine a different path and be able to accelerate their own career development and growth. So we saw a very significant decline with that group and are planning to continue that same momentum.
I would say that at US Bank, we're very proud of our retention. I would say we are seeing some of the lowest turnover rates that we've seen in many years. And I think it attributes to a few different things. We've really been clear and intentional about our key strategic priorities and how everyone sees themselves in that vision. We also are really clear about how everyone can be an inclusive leader, how they show up every day and really are intentional about how they bring their authentic selves to work. But we're also clear about you can see yourselves in these roles that when you want to be promoted, if you want to be an individual contributor, if you want to be a leader, you really can see yourself through succession planning, through our executive coaching. We really invest in those key players and are really intentional about how we make sure that they see their career path here at the bank. So I would say that I would agree with a lot of things that we're doing also with my colleagues here on how we're trying to help even from taking out some of our education requirements and things like that. We're trying to do that as well, but there really is a draw to stay with the bank. We see it's not, even on my team, I have 20 and 30-year tenures on my team. So it's very cool.
Kari and Chris, you see this from clients that you have. So why don't you talk about this, from that perspective?
Sure. It's always validating to hear it from others, from our perspective of what we're hearing. And we're working with many of you in the room, a lot of the Fortune 1000s. And I think what it always comes back to is, and you've all said it indirectly, how do we focus on identifying the future skills? And then how do we focus on putting together the appropriate collections, pathways, programs, whatever it might be, that really looks at identifying upskilling opportunities that tie back to how we're going to deliver ROI on our organization while also increasing retention or employee mobility. And then even beyond that, how do we identify the reskilling needs? Monica and I were actually talking last night at dinner, and I already mentioned it in my introduction, but Gen AI is top of mind for everyone, right? And the conversation has started to move away from how will AI automate certain roles to how is it going to augment our roles, and really focusing now on how do we upskill and reskill our HR organization amongst this tool that really moves the needle forward, both from a business perspective, but also, as you've all said, that human-centric perspective. Monica and I said this backstage, people don't lead companies, they lead people. And so how do we really focus on moving that needle? And tying in some of this more digital technology, technical focused training into some of our business softer human skills.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so there are a few things that I think are bringing these turnover rates down. One of them is what Christa alluded to right off the bat, which is the updated or changing economic landscape that's in play. So there's not as much job hopping that was going around when the economy was really booming. Secondly, I would say, and kudos to a lot of the people in this room, organizations are beginning to invest more and more in solutions and benefits, perquisites, whatever you want to call it, to retain people. And that's, I think, become a really, really big focus. There are, I think, two frontiers that organizations are trying, that we think some of the best organizations are starting to get a lot smarter about. And one of those frontiers is how to create much more scalable solutions. So it's not just about your high potentials or your executive leaders. It's really about how you can do it for everybody within the organization. The second thing is about internal mobility. And candidly, we at Randstad, we're still trying to figure out how to answer this one. In a recent survey we did, around 45% of talent acquisition professionals said that it was easier to find somebody to fill a role from outside the organization than it was from inside the organization. 55% of employees said it's easier for me to find my next job outside the organization than it is inside the organization. So there is some sort of a trick that we need to unlock within this space to make it easier for people to move within the organization. And so, I mean, those are, I think, the two next frontiers that we think some of the winners of this new game are going to start embracing.
It's very interesting statistics. Let me just ask, again, a rather basic level setting kind of question, but and all of you probably have your own answers to this, but what are the benefits for a company from improving internal mobility? Monica, why don't you give us a start?
Yeah, I think there's so many. I think when you think about who is our culture? Who do we want to be? A U.S. banker, as we say. Really bringing that brand to life and having that internal mobility, it really does a lot of service for us as a bank, because we want to make sure that we are serving our community and our customers with a brand that is really part of a high-performing team, right? That we're serving our customer and community that we really intend, and that our strategy connects to that. So I think there's a ton of benefits for us to keep that internal mobility. I think at the same time, how do we bring diversity of thought, help our internal mobility grow so they're not stagnant within the workplace, but they're really growing and adapting with the times so we can continue to be innovative. I think there is a stigma that if we just focus on internal mobility, there's not innovation, there's not diversity of thought or different imaginations to what we can do, but it's really how we are intentional. I love that word has become kind of repetitive on this stage, because it really is being intentional about the skill development we do with our internal mobility, and not just the shiny new talent that we bring in.
I maybe would add to that, Evan, one of the things that we've seen at United and how we've gotten some traction with our internal hiring is to make the business case about the cost of internal hiring versus external hiring. Yes, from a recruiting perspective, but also think about if you can do the org design and you might not need to backfill every role, but how are you bringing cost benefit to the business through this, I think has really resonated with some of our leaders, in addition to the talent outcomes we know that we get from it. But that's just been another lever to get the attention of leadership on this topic.
The other, if I could jump in, I mean, a big part of the Randstad Rise Smart business is helping organizations after they've had to let go of employees. So helping those employees find their next job. If you want to get the attention of your CFO, say, what would it look like if we didn't have to lay off anybody anymore? And what I mean by that is if you can start to do some of the skills cataloging that you referenced, and you can start to create better internal mobility, as some business functions may need to scale down hiring, but others are hiring, you can create really a much more fluid talent experience for your employees. Now, so you can save your money, you can keep your knowledge inside the house. They don't leave US Bank and go to some other bank. I think that's a huge benefit. And I think as HR professionals, sometimes we fall to the whims of finance. I was guaranteed no CFOs would be here today, so I can say that. But that's how you really start to save, I think, some money. We were on the phone yesterday with a large professional services organization, and they have 2,000 people that are on the bench. So they're not working on current projects right now. And they're trying to figure out how they can redeploy these people into other parts of their business within 30 days. Because by the way, if they let them go, they owe them, on average, 4 months of salary. Now, candidly, I think this company's kind of come to us a little bit too late. So I think ultimately the dollars are going to catch up to them. But I think that's really the bleeding edge of this and some of the impacts that some of the best organizations can start to experience.
Chris, if companies do this, aren't they putting you out of business?
No, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Kari.
You made go ahead, Kari.
No, you go ahead.
No, they're not. We say to some of there's a part of the HR services practicum called outplacement and career transition. That's a big part of the Rise Smart business. We go into our clients today and we say, here's an idea. How about you never have to spend another dollar on outplacement ever again? So we think that the best talent management strategies and the winners of this new game will look at it in that vein. How do you get your restructuring cost, your outplacement cost, your severance cost down as low to zero as possible? Kari, go ahead.
Jump in.
Yeah, no, I love all of these insights. The one thing I would add is if you think about the individual, the human being, you think about yourself, right? You think about every single one of us in this room have a desire to grow our careers, right? So you think about answering that question around career mobility and what's the benefits. The benefit is the person, right? The person feels like they're cared about and that they're seen and they're heard, and that what matters to them in terms of how they care for their families or their lifestyle or whatever it is important to the company. And that's what gives you that kind of stickiness with a company where people feel like, this is where I want to stay, this is where I want to grow my career. And so I think ultimately the benefit is around human beings and how they feel about being a part of your organization.
I want to ask all of you, what kind of tools you are using to, help employees acquire new skills, pursue opportunities within. Kari, this is your business. Let's start with you, and we'll go around the horn.
That's exactly our business. We're working with, our largest I'm thinking of a large pharmaceutical company, for example, and our entire focus with them is, and I think shared challenges up here with this organization is, how do we, one, identify the skills of the future? How do we make sure we validate them? How do we test them? How do we measure the proficiency of them within our organization? And then how do we benchmark them next to our peers? And then once we've done all that, and Coursera sort of provides this through what we call a skill taxonomy. We're right now in a partnership with Lightcast, so we can make it even easier for an organization to integrate this type of skill-first culture and environment within the organization. But after we've done that, and we've identified and built out this strategy, what do we do next? How do we bring this to our learner? And the way we bring it to our learners today is partnering with the likes of Vanderbilt, IBM, Google, and bringing all of that learning in-house in an asynchronous journey where a learner can go through various different modalities. You need to learn something really quick on Excel. A few of us were talking about this last night. How can I learn something in 5 minutes? All the way down to a stack of professional certifications that, to the point of retention and reskilling, we can start looking at who are our high potentials and or who are those that are really interested in potentially moving out of HR and into tech and show high potential in cloud. And we need more folks focused on our cloud migration and provide them an opportunity to earn a professional certification from Google, all in sort of one-stop shop. And then on the back end, for all of you as the learning leaders, be able to track that in the metrics. I think one of the biggest changes I've seen over the last year, and I think it would resonate with everyone, is learning leaders, we've sort of moved away from this buffet style of learning, right? We're providing learning as a benefit. We're creating it all in-house. We hired 55 SMEs that are going to develop all this instructional design for us. we've moved away from that into very intentional learning that delivers ROI on the business. But what that means for all of you is that you are consistently reporting up to your executive team on how this learning is really making an impact in our organization, either through retention or the dollars or the time saved or whatever that might look like. And tools like Coursera make this really easy for you to do that alongside our team who is consistently consulting with you and analyzing that data.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, no, go, Monica.
I'm so passionate about this topic. I think that there's so much to be desired of how we're thinking about learning and how it's really coming in-house for us. I think, Chris, you said something that really resonated with me about scalable programs. I think so often we talk about the very top of the house, right? The top 1% of those typos. But how are we really thinking about scalable engagements that's consistent but also personalized for our leaders? In leadership development, we really focus on, I'll say it this way, but like moving away from the spa day of learning, right? Where just, you came, you feel good, you left, you filled your smile sheet out. So really, how are you growing and driving the business forward? How are you really thinking about operational excellence? How are you strengthening the foundation of our business through the time we're spending together? Because we know that people in the traditional ways of learning are retaining 10% of our investment. So it really is, we have to change the culture of how we think about learning. I think it's demanding our innovation right now, and with scale, as Chris said, that connection is the hardest part of my job, 100%. You know, when you think about 12,000 leaders at US Bank, how do we bring scale that's meaningful and doesn't cost us millions upon millions of dollars? And so my team is really focused on that connection piece of how you make 80% common, 20%, you know, really custom, that we can really enable and empower our leaders to bring it to their leaders, and soon we'll be really thinking about cultural revolution. So.
What I was going to say is I think the tools and the ability to scale are hugely important, especially at a company like United. And I think in order to foster that, and culture has come up multiple times, I just think about what's all the pre-work you can do. So say you're at a company that can't afford to invest in a technology right now. What is your culture of mobility? What are managers looking at as their accountability for being talent stewards instead of talent hoarders? And so what are the processes, policies, you know, cultural elements that you can work on either ahead of a technology or despite not having funding for a technology?
I think the only thing I would add is I think being really clear about what the objective is, which I think is what you've all already said is really important, right? So why are we doing a development strategy and what are we trying to accomplish? You know, for us, it's typically we're trying to solve a problem, right? So we developed a supervisor development program, which we happen to do on site at all of our development sites, was 80 different sessions in person, which is unique for us. We don't normally do that. The reason we did it is we had seen a spike in supervisor turnover. And by the way, they're leading 4,500 employees in our organization, right? So if they're not good leaders and supervisors, they're not leading people in a way that's, you know, helping us, you know, produce the product that we're making. And so it was very targeted to what are we trying to accomplish with this audience and how are we going to measure it over time so that we knew that it worked. You can't do that with everything. You really can't. You have to be very intentional because we don't have enough resources to do that. But that would be the only thing I'd add is I think that measurement is really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's been like the biggest shift we've seen, right? In learning and HR and some of these more historically qualitative type of functions across a business is really being able to sort of prove that our strategy works, that our strategy is really moving the needle. I should have mentioned this, but something Christa said made me think about it. I think amongst the layer amongst or below all of this is, you know, as we're thinking about tools, as we're thinking about strategies, as we're thinking about our leaders, like also thinking about that equity piece. Like how do we bring, we already know we need a diverse workforce, we need an inclusive workforce, but how do we make sure this reskilling, these opportunities are bringing equity to how we retain, how we promote, how we internally mobilize is a key part, I think, in our work with all of our organizations today. It's really good.
Kari, you just mentioned something about your supervisors, but I want to ask about, you know, even the folks who are kind of below them, you know, people who aren't on any kind of management track or rising up and stuff, but you still want to retain them. They have skills or talents that are important. And so, they need to keep up, technology changing and everything like that. So what do you do to incentivize and retain them?
So I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think career development does not exist in and of itself, right? It needs to be connected to something. And for us, it's connected to our culture. And our culture is really this idea of, do you know and do you care? And it doesn't matter if you're an employee, it doesn't matter if you're a manager, it doesn't matter what your role is, but that's what we want to be known for. Externally, that's what we want to be known for. Internally, that here you're known and you're cared about. So if you think about somebody, in terms of their career development, it doesn't matter if I'm in a job that I love. I mean, there are certain stages of my life where I wanted to stay in that job for a period of time. I had little kids, I had things I was balancing. Everybody has different, dynamics and different reasons that they want to, make different decisions. But to be able to have conversations with your leader and to know your leader cares about you and they know what you're interested in, and then they can work with you on a career path that works for you. And it's going to look different for me. And that's where I think the programs are so important, but it doesn't replace that one-on-one conversation and relationship between a manager and his or her employee, or other peers that you can connect with and say, I'm thinking about this for my career, I'm weighing these two things, what do you think? Because all of us can get better every day. And when we talk about development, we typically talk about what can you do today that's gonna make you more effective in this job today. And by the way, that might help you get ready for the next one. But let's start with what you do today and how do you get better at what you do today, and then how do you leverage your strengths, and what do you love? What do you get enjoyment and energy and excitement out of? Because the more you do that, the more you're going to really enjoy the work. So all I will say is we do have programs. We do talk a lot about how to support development through skills training and such. But I think there's nothing that replaces that one-on-one conversation and how it connects to your culture and how do you bring that to life.
We do hear increasingly that managers are really struggling to have those one-on-one conversations as well. And so I do think outside partnerships can help train managers to have these conversations. Scalable coaching solutions can certainly be that external perspective that somebody can speak to in order to get ready for a difficult conversation with their boss or navigate a certain family situation that's making that their work-life balance really tricky. So some of these solutions that are out there, which are scalable and inclusive by nature because they're for everybody, we think can really help people navigate this.
Well, you had said as much as 40% of the population wants to grow in different into different roles and experiences. So, are there other ways that that leaders can ensure, as you say, that things are programs and strategies are inclusive and scalable?
Sure. Yeah. For us, what we're considering and what we're seeing play out in the marketplace is scalable coaching, one-on-one coaching. I think this is actually ICF for the International Coaching Federation. It's International Coaching Week. Historically, coaching was kind of reserved for the top segment of leaders within the organization. So it probably wasn't the most, inclusive solution out there. Now what we're seeing is coaching as and when people need it. So scalable coaching solutions which employees can use as and when they need it. Now some organizations are setting this up, creating their own internal bench of coaches who are maybe people who have been certified as coaches or at the very least want to be mentors. We think that that's really powerful. There are external solutions out in the market that offer coaching for everybody. And again, that's not to compare them to, say, mental health solutions or EAPs, but that is really something that we're seeing quite innovative, and we're seeing more. I think we're in the early innings of this concept of scalable coaching for everybody, because I think, sure you guys have all seen it, it seems like every survey of employees asks them, what do you want? And you can stack rank it. And somewhere between 40 to 45% of people are saying they want career development. Well, I'm sure everybody in the room then says, well, what the hell does that mean? And so what we are finding is that means different things to different people. And so the more you can create personalized learning and development spaces through really the most personalized thing you can have, which is a one-on-one interaction with a human, we think that can really help enable that.
Monica, go ahead.
I totally agree with you on that piece. I would say that, Matthew Daniels, he talks a lot about the two biggest impacts to career development are coaching and assessments. Like if any learning organization is going to double down on two things, it's those two investments. And you talk about scalable coaching opportunities, and I am so glad that the industry is moving towards that direction, because at the end of the day, it's about my career and what I want from it. It doesn't matter about the skills and all those different pieces, but what am I doing to use these tools for the end game for me? I think, Kari, you said it so well. It really is we are HR. This is a human organization, and we're a business of humans. And how coaching really does impact that. I think it's wild to see some of the stats. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to see the impact it makes, but the scalable piece, the accessible piece, the inclusive piece is, I think, where a lot of organizations are at a crux of, we need to invest in this, and it's not a small investment, but where could it catapult our career progression, our internal mobility, all the things that we're talking about, it could really unlock a lot.
I love that you just said that. I'm sure everyone here has read a ton of research, right, from the Big Four, from Gartner, for all of them. But there's a lot of research out there right now about the intersection that we're seeing in learning today and how it meets the digital era. And that a lot of organizations are going to swing and say, AI, we got to focus on all these things. But what the research is actually telling us is that though it seems like we need to shift our focus to upskilling in these really technical areas, no matter what part of the business you fall in, what we really need is a focus on the human skills, because the human skills are what's going to drive everything else. And if we hyper-focus and swing the pendulum one way, we're going to lose everything that makes our organization great and really has moved the needle for years and years and years. So it's this interesting and unique opportunity. And we saw it with CIOs when we were all migrating to the cloud, and we saw CIOs starting to have these different conversations amongst the business. And then 2020, the supply chain broke, and we saw the same thing happen with our supply chain executives. Today, we're seeing it with the CLOs and the CHROs. Now they're coming together with CTOs, with COOs of really, how do we drive this human-centric, to use a catchy term, human-centric skills, and then really align that to what we think all these other skills are going to be, while we don't lose that person, to everyone's point up here.
We've got just a few minutes left, so I think I'll just ask each of you to just kind of give a thought on, we've each mentioned at sort of one moment or another the word inclusion and DEI and things like this. I frequently come to the idea in my columns that on the margins, all growth in Minnesota is happening because of people of color. Our managements and our HR departments and our structures are all still fairly white-centric and everything like that. So I'd like you all to just sort of talk about, the challenges, the opportunities that this demographic change is going to present for Minnesota businesses over the next, well, forever onward, but really acutely in the next decade.
Sure, I can start. I think I heard somebody earlier talk about the broken rung, and that is something that I do think is key to reaching the aspirations that we have at UnitedHealth Group for more diversity in leadership. And I also think sometimes in Minnesota we have to myth bust a little bit and talk about that broken rung, that we have the diversity at our company. We have to figure out how to develop that talent and move them to the next role and opportunity. I think there's a lot of perception at times that we don't have the diversity that we need, but we actually do. And so it's just doubling down for me on that internal strategy and lifting up the talent that we need to get to those leadership levels.
Yeah, I think similar. I think it's also, you said a challenge, it's also an opportunity, right? So if you can think about how do you tell your story externally in terms of who you are as an organization and why somebody might want to come and work for you, and then be thoughtful about kind of unique scenarios and situations. For us, some of it's language, right? My primary language is Spanish, right? So how can I come work for your manufacturing facility and feel like I can still contribute and make a difference when my primary language is not English? So we have to think about simple things like, how do we train? How do we onboard? How do we talk and communicate with your supervisor on a regular basis, right? So I do think it's an opportunity. But I think it all starts with really being able to tell your story in a compelling way and then actually following through on it. That whole brand promise. Like we say we're a great place to work, but are we really? Like, do we really create an environment that keeps employees growing? And for us, we anchor it to our culture, and it's called One Table, One Team. Does everyone have a meaningful seat at the table, right? And how do you know?
Great point. As you guys all know, the banking industry has been through some change over the last couple of years, and we've really been focused on how we grow and how we evolve through those changes in the landscape. And one of the things that we are insatiable about is inclusion. We've actually just hired an inclusive growth officer that is focused on inclusion is not just a nice to have, it's a need to have as we think about how the business grows in the future. And with that comes some really strategic programming around what we call our journey to inclusion, where everyone is expected to be inclusive, and this is how you learn together, how we all come together around inclusion, whether it be different mindsets, different every aspect of diversity. But in learning especially, we have some really key European partners that have been teaching us, I think, some really important lessons around inclusion, around language especially, but how we're really thinking about bringing everyone to the table. I heard a quote recently that said that HR, we're not coming to the table, we are the table. We are the table that people come to rally around. I think Alcio, our CHRO, had said it to us recently. How are we as HR really bringing all of these different partners to the table to really enable what inclusion looks like and really bring that change for the organization?
Absolutely. I think there's two things that come to mind when I think about the clients that I work with. One is strategy, which you heard here, is making sure it's actually in your strategy, that we don't have it as a tagline in our mission statement, it's in our strategic roadmap. And then the second thing is, how do we think about it maybe perhaps a little out of the box, and I'll give you an example. We partner with Olay. You can Google Olay and you'll see hashtag Face the STEM Gap. And they as an organization decided we are going to increase, and they're being measured on it, all the way up to the CEO of P&G as well. We are going to increase the number of women in STEM programs at our organization 2 times by 2030. And we're going to triple the number of women of color by 3 times by 2030. And so they've been bringing together various different groups, including Coursera, to figure out how do we really move the needle on that? What will that look like? And so February 8th, I believe, was International Women's Day, and that was the day that we made the announcement that we are going to be rolling out up to 5,000 Coursera licenses to women of color coming from HBCUs and provide them with an opportunity to learn on Coursera in addition to whatever program they might be with STEM. For them as a business, this is also, of course, a recruiting tactic. How do we put them into our talent pipeline? We know we need to increase the number of women of STEM in our organization. How can we impact a new generation of college graduates and then get them into sort of a hire to retire type of program within our organization?
Chris, very briefly.
Yeah, just briefly, because I know we're tight on time. I just think you mentioned the margins. And with talent scarcity becoming a real thing, if we're not able to pull those people that are at the margins into our organizations, we're not going to be able to staff our organizations, and we're not going to be able to provide services to those communities because we're not going to know their language, and we're not going to know how to speak to those communities. So.
Well, Christa, Kari, Monica, Corey, and Chris, thank you so much.